Hello everyone. Before we start, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment with where you are watching from and what time it is for you. That's how YouTube keeps sending you stories like this. And now, let's get into it. I had just clocked out from my late shift at the warehouse in Palm Coast, Florida, around 11 at night. The streets leading out of town were quiet, empty except for the occasional car, and the air smelled faintly of wet asphalt from the rain that had stopped about an hour earlier. I was looking forward to being home, shutting the lights off, and finally relaxing after a long day moving boxes and stacking pallets. My car tires hissed against the slick highway as I merged onto I-95 northbound. And for a while, the drive was just the usual routine. Streetlights passing overhead in a rhythm, the faint hum of my engine, the occasional sound of a car cutting by on the left lane. About 20 minutes into the drive, I noticed a semi-truck in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. Big trucks were common on that stretch of the highway, and maybe he was just catching up to me after a slower exit. But as the minutes passed, something began to feel off. The truck wasn't passing me. It wasn't changing lanes. It wasn't even getting closer or farther away. It was just there, behind me, following me at the same distance, same speed. I shifted my gaze back and forth between the mirror and the road ahead, thinking maybe I was imagining it, or that another car had distracted me, but no. There it was, a looming metal shadow in the rear view. I tried changing lanes, easing over to the left, then back to the right, trying to get ahead or create distance. But the truck mirrored me perfectly, every move I made. My stomach tightened. I started tapping my fingers on the steering wheel, without meaning to, the rhythmic tapping turning into a jittery, uneven beat as I realized how long it had been following me. My pulse started hammering. The highway was mostly empty, save for the occasional car that would zip past on the left lane, headlights blurring in the rain, washed night. I kept checking my rear view, and there was no sign of the truck leaving. I tried to focus on the road, on keeping my speed consistent, but a creeping sense of panic started to build. My hands gripped the steering wheel harder, knuckles turning white. The fluorescent green and red of overhead highway signs reflected in the puddles along the road's edge, and I felt my heart skip when I noticed the truck still there, unwavering, a massive presence behind me that didn't belong hours. Or maybe it felt like hours, though in reality it was probably less than 40 minutes. Passed like that. I followed the highway north, my mind racing through every possible scenario. Maybe it was a driver who had fallen asleep at the wheel, keeping pace without paying attention. Maybe he was waiting for an exit I was about to take. Maybe I was just tired and imagining things, my brain playing tricks on me after a long night at work. But the consistency of the truck's presence left no room for doubt. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. By the time I reached Daytona, I was approaching a red light at an intersection. My eyes widened when I got a clear look at the driver. He was tall, unnaturally so. At least that's how he seemed behind the wheel of that enormous truck. His skin was pale under the faint glow of the streetlights, and his expression was perfectly still. No emotion, no movement, just a blank, fixed stare aimed straight ahead. He didn't look at me. He didn't blink, or at least I couldn't see him blink from that distance. But he was there, and the sight of him made my stomach twist into knots. My hands were shaking on the wheel. The light turned green and I hit the gas without thinking. The sound of my tires on the wet road was loud in the otherwise silent intersection. I sped off, weaving slightly as my panic overtook me. Glancing in the mirror over and over, the truck followed. Every turn I took, every acceleration, every small maneuver, it was there. It didn't overtake me, it didn't slow down, it just followed. I passed exits I would normally take without thought, refusing to stop anywhere unless I had to. My eyes darted over the road signs, looking for familiar landmarks, trying to remember the smaller roads that might let me get off the highway, away from this unrelenting shadow. The rain had stopped, but the roads were still slick in patches, and my car felt heavier, slower, as if the air itself was pressing down on me. When I reached the outskirts of Jacksonville, the situation reached a breaking point. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I knew I couldn't keep driving on the main highway like this. with the truck behind me for who knows how long. I took the next exit I knew, a back road that I remembered from years of driving this way. I eased onto the narrower asphalt, the sudden shift in environment making me tense. There were trees on either side, dark shadows stretching across the road in the headlights. I dared to glance back in the mirror once more. The truck was gone, just like that. The massive, unyielding presence that had been behind me for almost the entirety of the drive was gone, vanished as if it had never been there. I slowed down to a crawl, scanning the road behind me, expecting it to appear again at any moment, but there was nothing. No headlights, no shadow, nothing. Just the soft rustling of leaves and the occasional distant hum of another vehicle far away. I drove the rest of the way home in a daze, my hands still gripping the wheel tightly, my mind replaying every detail of the truck and that driver. I kept checking mirrors over and over, half expecting to see it reappear at any moment, but nothing came. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the relief was so intense I could feel it physically. I left the engine running for a few minutes, just sitting there, waiting for my pulse to slow down. Inside, I told myself I must have been exhausted, too tired, maybe even hallucinating a little from the long shift, but every detail was so clear, so real, that it was impossible to completely dismiss. I knew I wasn't imagining the truck. I knew I had seen that driver, pale and expressionless, staring straight ahead. Whatever it was real, and I had no idea why it had followed me that night. In the days that followed, I avoided that stretch of I-95 after dark. I took alternate routes, even if it meant adding extra time to my commute. I replayed the drive over and over, analyzing every decision, every moment, wondering if there had been something I could have done differently. The truck never appeared again, but the memory of it remained, a constant presence in the back of my mind whenever I drove at night. I couldn't explain it, and I still can't. I don't know if the driver had any intention beyond following me, or if he had even noticed me at all. What I do know is that the sense of being watched, of being followed with no reason, is something I will never forget, and every time I get on a highway late at night, I feel that same tightening in my chest, a reminder that sometimes, on the road, you are not alone, even when the world around you is empty. From that night on, I always checked my mirrors more than necessary, kept my phone in easy reach, and never underestimated the quiet of the empty highway. It was a lesson in vigilance, and a reminder that the open road can sometimes be far more unsettling than any darkness in the woods or storm in the night. Some encounters leave no trace. Some questions never get answered, and some drives stay with you forever. That night, somewhere between Palm Coast and Jacksonville, I learned all of that, and I carry it with me every time I leave home. I was driving alone on Route 66, somewhere just outside Tucumcari, New Mexico, around 2 a.m. The desert stretched endlessly on either side, flat and dark, with only the occasional silhouette of a distant mesa, or the faint outline of an old, abandoned building breaking the horizon. The sky was clear, and the stars seemed unnaturally bright, but that didn't comfort me. The wind had picked up slightly, moving in gentle waves across the sand and rattling the edges of the old highway signs. My eyes felt heavy from the long drive, and I could feel the weight of fatigue pressing down on my eyelids. I kept telling myself I was almost there, that I just needed to make it to my friend's house, but the monotony of the road and the isolation of the desert were gnawing at me. The asphalt was smooth but old, worn from decades of traffic. The yellow lines were faded and chipped, and patches of sand had blown across the road, making certain stretches slick. I was careful to keep my speed steady, but sleep was starting to creep in despite my best efforts. I shifted in my seat, turned up the radio, anything to stay alert. The desert was quiet, almost too quiet, and the silence weighed on me. There was no traffic at all, not a single other car in sight, until suddenly, a pair of headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was just another car finally on the road, someone catching up after a long stretch of emptiness. But something about the lights was wrong. They were impossibly bright, almost glaring, and there was no hum of an engine, no distant rumble. It was as if the lights themselves were moving without a vehicle attached. I glanced back again, my heart starting to pick up pace. The headlights were closer. Much closer than they should have been, given the speed I was maintaining. A shiver ran down my spine. I floored the gas pedal, pushing my car harder, hoping to create distance, but the lights stayed. They didn't waver, didn't fade, just followed me, relentless and blinding in my mirrors. My chest started to tighten as panic set in. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe it was a truck behind me with a faulty headlight, or something reflecting off the desert somehow. But the closer I got to Tucumcari, the more the lights seemed to match every move I made. It felt like no matter how fast I drove, they were always right there, pressing against the rear of my vision. Finally, my nerves frayed, and I made a sudden decision. I pulled off the highway at the first turnoff I saw, an old, deserted gas station I must have passed a few miles back. The pumps were rusted, peeling paint flaking off the sides, and the windows of the station were dark, the glass cracked in places. I slammed the car into park and killed the engine, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. The lights vanished, just like that. One moment they were there, relentless, and the next, nothing. The emptiness of the desert was back, and all I could hear was the wind moving sand across the cracked pavement. I sat there for a long moment, trying to calm down, taking deep breaths, listening to the quiet. I looked around, scanning the open desert. Nothing. No other car, no movement. Nothing alive except for the distant stars and the faint, whispering wind. I told myself I had to check the car, just to be sure, so I stepped out into the cold desert air. The wind hit me sharply, and the night smelled of sand and dry brush. My shoes crunched on the gravel as I circled the vehicle, and that's when I noticed the tire tracks. They were fresh, pressed deep into the sand, near the edge of the old highway. The tracks led directly to my car, stopping abruptly at the front tires. There was no vehicle in sight. The patterns were clear, almost perfectly aligned with where I had parked, and the abrupt end made my stomach knot. I knelt down and ran my fingers over the sand, feeling the crisp edges of the prints. Someone had been there, someone had driven right up to my car, but now nothing. The tracks didn't lead away, didn't continue back onto the road. They just ended in the desert, as if the vehicle had simply disappeared. My mind raced. I considered every possibility. Someone could have been following me, maybe trying to intimidate me. But why leave the tracks so clearly? Why vanish without a trace? I scanned the desert again, the horizon flat and unbroken. My car's headlights lit up the surrounding sand and brush, but nothing moved. No rustling, no shadow, just the empty expanse. I felt exposed, like I was completely alone in a place that should have had some explanation for what I was seeing. The emptiness of the desert suddenly felt enormous, heavy, like it was pressing down on me from every angle. I didn't want to stay there. I felt an urgent need to get moving, to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever had left those tracks. I climbed back into the car, heart hammering, hands trembling on the steering wheel. I double-checked the doors, locked them, and started the engine. The sound of it was almost comforting, a small reassurance of normalcy. I eased back onto the highway, staying alert, glancing constantly at my mirrors. Nothing appeared. The lights didn't come back, and the tracks faded into the distance behind me. I drove the rest of the way with my eyes glued to the road, alert for every shadow, every movement. The desert around Tucumcari slowly transitioned into the faint lights of the small town, street lamps and neon signs coming into view. The normality of the buildings, the faint hum of distant traffic, the occasional flicker of a sign. All of it felt like a relief after the isolation and strangeness I had just experienced. My hands were sore from gripping the steering wheel, my eyes dry from staring, and my chest ached from tension. I parked outside my friend's house and sat there for a long moment before stepping out. The normal quiet of a small town night was so different from the eerie emptiness of the desert. I never understood exactly what had happened out there on Route 66. The headlights, the tracks, the sudden disappearance. It didn't make sense. But I knew one thing for certain. I was never going to drive that stretch of desert alone again at night. I learned to trust my instincts, to recognize the weight of fear as a signal, not a fancy or trick of the mind. The rest of the night I slept poorly, replaying the scene over and over, but I made it to my destination safely. I never saw anything again, but the memory of those headlights, bright and relentless, and the tire tracks ending abruptly in the sand, stayed with me for a long time. I avoided that highway late at night after that, always thinking back to the way the desert felt at 2 a.m., silent, empty, and impossibly vast. I was driving north on Highway 101 late one night, somewhere just outside San Luis Obispo. The sky was dark, overcast, and heavy with that kind of stillness that makes the night feel thicker than it really is. I had been on the road for hours, leaving Los Angeles earlier in the evening, trying to get home without stopping too much. Traffic had been light until just outside the city limits, but as I approached the outskirts, the usual slowing and merging began. The kind that makes you wish you had left later or earlier, anything to avoid the endless line of brake lights and impatient horns. My eyelids were heavy, my shoulders sore from holding the wheel too long, and my stomach was tight from skipping dinner. The radio was dead silent, no music, no voices, nothing to fill the space but the hum of my engine and the occasional whoosh of a car passing me. I remember seeing him first on the shoulder, a young guy with a thin frame, jeans that looked worn, and a faded hoodie. He had a backpack slung over one shoulder, and his thumb was out, the kind of gesture you see every day on highways, the sort of thing you're supposed to avoid. Usually, I keep driving, avoid strangers. My parents drilled it into me, my friends told me the same thing. But something about him stopped me, some tiny instinct that whispered that he wasn't just a random hitchhiker looking for a ride. Maybe it was the way he stood, shoulders hunched, head down but eyes straight on the road, like he was waiting for something he didn't want to miss. Maybe it was the desperation in his posture, the tension in his hands as he gripped the straps of his backpack. I slowed down, cursing under my breath, and then I pulled over. He didn't run toward the car or wave in a friendly way. He just walked over slowly, climbed in without a word, and immediately fixed his gaze on the windshield, staring straight ahead. I glanced at him, trying to catch a reaction, a smile, anything, but there was nothing. His eyes were dark in the dim interior light, unreadable, and he didn't move except to settle his backpack on the floor between us. The car felt heavier somehow, as though the air had thickened the moment he sat down. I wanted to speak, to ask where he was going, to say something polite, but the words felt awkward, trapped in my throat. I kept driving, the hum of the tires on the asphalt filling the quiet that had settled like a blanket over the cabin. After a few minutes, he finally spoke, his voice low and calm, almost rehearsed. He said I would take the next exit, that it was the last safe one before Cuesta Pass. I froze. My hand tightened on the wheel. That was exactly where I was headed. I had been planning to drive through the pass at night, figuring it would be quicker and easier without daytime traffic, but now my stomach churned. There was no mistaking it. He knew exactly where I was going. I tried to think rationally, to convince myself it was a coincidence, but the precision of his words made me sweat. I wanted to ask why he knew, how he knew, but I couldn't find the words. He didn't look at me, didn't flinch, just stared straight ahead. The tension in the car became unbearable. Every few seconds I caught myself checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following us, or some sign that this wasn't normal. But there was nothing. Just the dark stretch of highway, the dull glow of my headlights on the asphalt, and the occasional reflector from the guardrails flashing in and out of view. The road went ahead, curving slightly as it moved away from the flat stretches and started climbing gently toward the hills. I tried to focus on the drive, on keeping the car steady and my thoughts in check. My mind raced. Should I stop? Should I pull over somewhere else just to see if he'd leave? But there was nowhere to stop safely, no lights, no towns for miles. The thought of taking my chances on a dark exit ramp seemed worse. I had to trust the road, trust myself, even as every instinct screamed that something was off. When I finally reached the exit he had mentioned, my heart pounded so loudly I could hear it over the engine. I glanced at him, and he was gone. The seat was empty, the backpack gone. My eyes darted to the back seat and the floor, but there was no trace. The empty space looked ordinary at first, but the sudden absence was jarring, unsettling. I checked the mirrors, looking for him along the side of the road, the shoulder, the grassy embankment. Nothing. The night was quiet again, but now it felt hollow, the stillness sharper, more oppressive. I drove on slowly, keeping the headlights focused on the road ahead, every muscle in my body tense. The exit ramp led to a small cluster of lights, a rest area and gas station, nothing else. I pulled in, parked, and got out of the car, scanning the nearby area, but there was no sign of him. No footprints, no backpack, nothing that suggested he had ever been there. My mind kept trying to fill in the blanks, running through every possibility he had been playing a trick. I had imagined the whole thing. Someone was watching me from the dark. None of it felt right. I spent a long time at that rest area, pacing, trying to calm down, trying to convince myself it was just a coincidence. Finally, I got back in the car, still tense, still shaking a little. The road ahead led up into Kista Pass, the curves tight and dark, the trees pressing close on either side. I drove slowly, carefully, eyes scanning every shadow, every reflection on the asphalt, expecting him to reappear or some other strange occurrence. The rest of the night went on like that, each mile heavy with caution, each curve a small test of nerve and attention. When I finally reached the top of the pass, the moon was peeking through clouds, casting a pale light over the hills. I could see the faint lights of the city in the distance, the glow promising normalcy, safety. My hands loosened slightly on the wheel, my chest unclenching just a little. I stopped at the first gas station I found, filled up, grabbed a coffee, and sat in the car for a long time, trying to shake off the tension. I never saw him again. I have no idea who he was, how he knew about my route, or why he disappeared so suddenly. I still think about that night every time I drive Highway 101 after dark. I take Kista Pass slowly now, keeping my eyes on the road, never trusting the shadows, never picking up anyone on the shoulder. I've told myself it was a coincidence, that the brain fills in gaps when it's tired. But even now, years later, I remember the weight of his presence in the car, the way he spoke without moving his eyes, the way he vanished without a trace. It's a caution I carry with me every time I drive that stretch of highway. I can't explain it, but I know one thing. I will never drive through that part of the 101 at night without feeling a chill, without gripping the wheel a little tighter, without expecting the unexpected. That night taught me that sometimes strangers aren't just strangers, and sometimes the road itself holds more than just asphalt and headlights. You can't always see it, but you feel it, and it stays with you long after the drive is over. From that night on, I plan my trips carefully, avoiding long stretches at night whenever I can, leaving earlier, taking breaks, stopping in lit areas. I keep my doors locked even when I'm parked at a crowded rest stop, and I've learned to trust instincts that scream danger, even when nothing seems wrong. It's not fear I feel anymore, it's awareness. A vigilance born from a night on Highway 101, when reality proved that even the familiar, ordinary road can carry a weight of uncertainty that lingers far beyond the drive itself. Driving now, I notice every shoulder, every curve, every exit sign. I check my mirrors constantly, not expecting anything, but knowing that the unexpected is always possible. It's not paranoia, at least I tell myself it isn't. It's experience, hard-earned and unforgiving. That night, the empty seat, the vanished backpack, and the quiet warning changed the way I drive forever. I can never unsee it, never unfeel it, and I don't want to. Because awareness, I've learned, is the only real safeguard when the road stretches on in the dark, endless and indifferent, and strangers appear out of nowhere. I still take that road sometimes, but I'm careful. I keep my eyes on the road, my mind alert, and I never, ever pick up someone on the shoulder. The memory is clear, vivid, and impossible to forget. It's a lesson in caution, a story I carry silently, a reminder that the world outside the city is not always empty and not always safe. That one night on Highway 101 is with me every time I drive north, a quiet shadow of memory and instinct that ensures I never forget how real the unexpected can be. I was driving east on I-90 near Snoqualmie Pass late one evening, the kind of night where the darkness seems heavier than usual, almost pressing against the car windows. Snow had been falling steadily for hours, coating the road in a thin layer of ice and slush. The windshield wipers were working overtime, but the visibility was still low. The faint glow of my headlights barely reached more than 100 feet ahead, and the reflection of the road in the wet asphalt made every shadow seem like it moved on its own. I had been on the highway for nearly 2 hours, and the steady hum of the engine and the wipers was the only thing breaking the silence, a silence that felt unusually thick in the cold night air. I was in the right lane, keeping a cautious speed of about 50 miles per hour, the tires crunching lightly on the wet surface. My eyes kept flicking from the road to the rearview mirror, scanning for any other cars, any movement. Then I noticed it, a car in the mirror, but there was something wrong. Its lights were off. Normally, you would notice headlights first, even in a snowstorm. But this car was just there, a dark shape behind me, reflecting faintly in the mirror. I blinked, thinking it might be a trick of the dim streetlights and the wet asphalt reflecting light, but it stayed. I slowed down slightly, my foot easing off the gas. The car behind me slowed as well, almost in sync with my own speed. My stomach tightened. I sped up again, pushing to about 60 miles per hour. The dark car did the same. No lights, no horn, no signal, just silently tracking my every move. My hands started shaking on the wheel. I glanced quickly at the left lane, wondering if I could move over and let it pass, but the highway was empty. The snow was falling harder now, sticking to the sides of my car and the guardrails, muting the world into gray and white. I tried not to panic, telling myself it was probably another driver making a mistake, maybe someone whose lights had failed. But even as I reasoned that, the feeling of unease in my chest grew heavier. My heart pounded against my ribs as I kept checking the mirror. The car was still there. It didn't blink, it didn't swerve. It just followed. I thought about pulling off at one of the next rest stops, but the storm had made every turnoff a gamble. Slipping on the ice, getting stuck in snow, or worse, losing control of my car. It all raced through my mind faster than my speedometer. I kept my speed steady, hands tight on the wheel, eyes darting from the road to the mirror every few seconds. The snow was coming down thicker now, reducing my visibility further, and I could barely see more than a few feet past the guardrail. The dark car stayed just behind me, its outline barely visible through the swirling snowflakes. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I felt a jolt of panic, a tightening in my chest, as if my instincts were screaming at me to get out of there immediately. I reached for my phone, hoping I might get some signal to call for help. But as expected, there was nothing. No bars, no service, just the dim glow of the screen against the darkness. I considered turning around, going back the way I had come, but that thought made me more anxious. What if it followed me the other way? What if it had been waiting for someone like me to panic? I forced myself to focus on the road, breathing steadily, trying to calm my racing heart. When the next exit for North Bend appeared on the horizon, I hit my turn signal and started to slow down. The car behind me didn't move as quickly at first, and for a few seconds, I thought it might continue straight on the highway. But then it slowed down too, keeping the same distance behind me as I exited. My pulse was hammering in my ears, and I gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The moment I turned fully onto the exit ramp, the car didn't follow. I watched the rearview mirror carefully as the curve of the exit led me away from the highway. The dark shape faded into the snowstorm, melting into the night. I kept driving slowly, taking the off-ramp with caution, letting the adrenaline ease just a little as the weight of the moment pressed down on me. Even as I merged onto the smaller, quieter road toward North Bend, I could still hear the faint, ghostly sound of tires on wet asphalt echoing in my mind. I knew it wasn't really there anymore, but it felt like it, as if the sound had attached itself to my consciousness. The snow was lighter on this road, and the fewer cars passing by made the world feel almost abandoned. Streetlights flickered intermittently, giving brief glimpses of empty driveways and snow-covered lawns. I passed a gas station, its neon sign humming quietly in the night, and slowed down, thinking I might pull in just to collect myself, maybe to call someone and say I was okay. But I didn't. I needed to keep moving, to get back into the flow of the road and distance myself from whatever had been following me. By the time I reached the small town of North Bend, the storm had slowed, and the streets were calm and nearly empty. I parked in a quiet lot, the car still shivering slightly from the cold, and sat for a long time, gripping the steering wheel and staring out at the snow-covered ground. My breathing finally began to slow, and the adrenaline gradually ebbed. The highway, with its dark shape behind me, the icy patches, the low visibility, it all felt like a nightmare that had stretched on for hours, though in reality it had been less than 30 minutes. I spent the next hour driving carefully through the town, following well-lit streets and watching for any signs of movement. The dark car never appeared again, and for the first time, I felt a fragile sense of relief. By the time I finally reached my friend's house, the snow had stopped completely, and the roads were clear enough for normal driving. I parked my car in the driveway, my hands still a little shaky, and turned off the engine. The house felt warm and safe in comparison to the empty, snow-covered highway I had just left behind. Even after getting inside and thawing out, the memory of that car lingered. The way it followed silently, the complete absence of lights, the way it mirrored my every movement, it felt impossible, unreal, yet terrifyingly real. I thought about the possible explanations: a driver with faulty lights, someone who might have been lost, or even a car with no driver at all, left to slide along the icy roads. Nothing seemed to fit perfectly, and that uncertainty was what stuck with me the most. I made a mental note to avoid driving late at night in snowstorms for the foreseeable future, to stick to busy roads, and to always keep my phone within reach, fully charged. Even with those precautions, the thought of a dark car following me silently on a slick, empty highway would never fully leave me. It was a reminder of how vulnerable you are when the conditions are against you, when the roads are empty, and when you're alone. The rest of that night, I lay in bed replaying every moment of the drive, imagining what might have happened if I hadn't noticed it in the mirror, if I hadn't taken that exit. By morning, the snow had turned to slush, and the roads were easier to navigate. Driving back later in daylight felt almost normal, but the memory of that night stayed with me, clear and sharp, like a warning carved into my mind. I realized that sometimes danger doesn't announce itself with noise or lights, and sometimes it comes silently, following you just closely enough to make you doubt your own instincts. That night on I-90 near Snoqualmie Pass was proof of that, a lesson in awareness, caution, and the strange, unsettling reality of being alone on the highway when the world is quiet and the snow is falling. Even now, whenever I drive late at night in similar conditions, I find myself checking the mirrors more often than necessary, my eyes scanning for that dark shape that once followed me, reminding me that some dangers don't announce themselves. They simply follow. I was driving south on I-5 near Salem late one night, the kind of night where everything outside feels empty and quiet, and even the hum of the highway feels louder than it should. The sky was dark, thick with clouds, and the rain from earlier had left the road slick. My car's headlights cut through the gloom in front of me, reflecting faintly on the wet asphalt. I was almost out of gas and decided I needed to fill up before I got too far from Salem. My GPS showed an exit about 3 miles ahead, promising a gas station not far off the highway, so I slowed down, signaling and taking the exit. At first, everything seemed normal. The ramp curved gently down, and the familiar smell of wet asphalt filled the air. But almost immediately, the pavement narrowed, the lane lines disappearing under shadow. The headlights revealed dense trees, pressing close, on either side of the road, their branches drooping toward the asphalt, like they were trying to block me in. The GPS insisted I was on the right path, but the road was so narrow I could feel the trees brushing against my side mirrors. I slowed, gripping the steering wheel tightly, watching the road disappear into darkness. The first thing that hit me was the silence. There was no sound of cars, no faint hum from a distant highway, just the occasional rustle of wind through the trees and the low rumble of my own engine. I expected the gas station to appear around any corner, but the further I drove, the more I realized something was wrong. The road twisted sharply, and I had to swerve carefully to avoid the rough edges, which seemed almost unpaved in spots. There were no signs, no lights, nothing that would indicate civilization. Just the trees, the wet asphalt, and the feeling of being boxed in. I glanced at the GPS again. The little blue dot blinked stubbornly, telling me I had indeed taken the right exit. but the road ahead made no sense. It looked like a logging trail more than a highway ramp, a single strip of asphalt barely wide enough for one car. I felt my stomach tighten. I thought about turning around, but the road was so narrow, I had to pull the wheel sharply and edge along, trying to avoid the branches scraping my paint. My heart rate started to climb, each second stretching longer than it should. Then I heard it. At first, I thought I was imagining it, a faint engine behind me. But it grew steadily louder, though when I glanced in the rearview mirror, there was nothing there. No lights, no car, just darkness pressed against the small rear window of my vehicle. I sped up slightly, feeling a pang of panic, and the sound seemed to vanish. I slowed, hoping it was just my imagination, and the engine growled again, closer this time, but still invisible. I kept driving cautiously, scanning the trees that now seemed oppressive and unyielding. The road dipped, then rose over a small hill, forcing me to rely entirely on my headlights. Everything ahead was black. Everything behind me seemed alive with a phantom presence. I was halfway convinced I had taken some wrong turn that no one else used, that maybe the GPS was glitching, leading me into a road that didn't exist. My hands were tight on the wheel, knuckles white, and my breathing was shallow. After what felt like an eternity, I saw the faint outline of a split in the road, where it widened just enough to pull over. I stopped, taking a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. I tried to make sense of where I was. The trees were still close, almost touching the roof of the car, if the wind caught their branches. There was no sign of a gas station, no indication that this road led anywhere. I turned the steering wheel carefully, trying to navigate a U-turn. The tires crunched over wet leaves, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I edged back the way I had come, glancing constantly in the rearview mirror. Every shadow, every tree seemed threatening. I kept expecting the engine sound to start again, but the road remained empty behind me. The GPS still stubbornly insisted I was moving toward the gas station. I wanted to scream in frustration, to throw the steering wheel in anger at the impossible situation, but I kept my focus tight. I couldn't afford to lose control here. After several tense minutes, I finally spotted the faint glimmer of headlights cutting through the dense trees in the distance. Relief surged through me. I drove carefully toward them, realizing they were coming from the main highway. The narrow, oppressive road finally gave way to the wider, familiar lanes of I-5, and I almost laughed in disbelief that I had actually made it back. The GPS showed the exit again, blinking stubbornly, as if mocking me. I eased onto the highway, shaking, glancing back at the dark road I had just escaped. Once I was back on the highway, I kept my eyes glued to the road ahead. The familiar signs for Salem were a comfort. The steady lines of cars passing by a reassurance that I wasn't alone. My pulse gradually slowed as the trees thinned, and the darkness gave way to more open stretches. I checked the GPS again. It still showed the exit, still insisting there was a route through those trees to a gas station. But I had no desire to test it again. The memory of that narrow road, the way the trees had seemed to press in on me, the phantom engine behind me, lingered. By the time I reached a well-lit gas station further down I-5, I was still on edge, scanning the surrounding area. The station was empty except for a lone attendant inside, and the harsh fluorescent lights made me feel almost safe, like I could finally breathe. I pulled up to a pump, still gripping the wheel tightly, and filled the tank with shaking hands. Every sound outside, the wind rattling the pump canopy, the distant hum of the highway, made me jump. I stayed in the car for a few minutes after filling up, unwilling to get out immediately, unwilling to leave the illusion of safety. After a while, I finally started the car and pulled back onto I-5, heading south toward home. The experience stuck with me long after that night. The exit still exists on Google Maps, but I've never taken it again, and I never will. I tell myself the GPS glitched or that the map data was outdated, but I know what I felt in that narrow, dark forest road. The tension, the suffocating closeness of the trees, the phantom engine behind me. It was real enough to scare me out of ever taking another night exit in that area. Now, whenever I drive past that part of I-5 near Salem, I keep my tank topped off. I avoid exits late at night. I stick to the main roads, where the lights are constant and the pavement is wide. The memory of that dark, twisting forested road, where the GPS lied and the highway seemed to vanish, is etched in my mind. I can still feel the branches brushing my mirrors, the oppressive silence pressing in on me, and the unreal sense that I wasn't alone even when I couldn't see anyone. It's a reminder that sometimes technology fails, and when it does, the world around you can feel far more dangerous than it ever should. From that night on, I've been careful. I watch my route before driving. I check exits during the day, and I never take unknown roads at night. I learned the hard way that not every road that shows on a map is safe, and not every exit is what it seems. That stretch near Salem taught me to trust my instincts over technology, to respect the emptiness of the forest, and to never underestimate how quickly a normal drive can turn into a nerve-wracking experience. The GPS may still show that exit, but I know better now. Some roads are better left alone, and some nights it's safer to keep driving. I was driving across Route 50 near Eureka, Nevada, in the dead of night. They call it the loneliest road in America, and I understood why almost immediately. The air was dry, cold, and thin, with a faint breeze that rattled the loose gravel on the shoulder of the road. The moon hung low in the sky, a thin crescent, and clouds drifted across it like smoke, casting shifting shadows on the empty landscape. Everything was silent except for the hum of my tires on the asphalt and the low rumble of the engine. The desert stretched endlessly on both sides, dark hills and flat plains dissolving into blackness beyond the reach of my headlights. I had been driving for hours, my eyes straining to keep focus, fatigue creeping into my shoulders and the back of my neck. I had left Carson City late in the evening and was heading east toward Fallon, planning to reach there before sunrise. The road was empty, not a single other car in sight. The only things breaking the monotony were the occasional road signs, worn and faded, and the odd ranch house, lit dimly from a distance, scattered sparsely across the desert. The isolation was beautiful at first, calming almost, but as the hours dragged on, it became heavy, oppressive. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears and settles deep in your chest. Then I saw him. At first, I thought I had imagined it. A dark shape in the middle of the road, just standing there, waving. My heart leaped, and my hands gripped the wheel tighter. I swerved instinctively, tires screeching against the asphalt as I avoided him by just a few feet. My pulse jumped so hard I could feel it in my throat. The man was average height, wearing what looked like a dark jacket and jeans, but in the low light, details were hard to make out. I blinked, and when my headlights swept past where he had been, he was gone. For a moment, I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the shadows, a mirage caused by exhaustion, but my gut told me it wasn't. I kept driving, forcing myself to calm down, telling myself it was probably a hitchhiker or someone who had walked onto the road and gone off to the side before I got too close. My hands were still tight on the steering wheel, knuckles white, and I found myself checking the rearview mirror obsessively, expecting to see a reflection of him there. Nothing. Just the dark highway stretching endlessly behind me, black and empty. Then, about 20 minutes later, I saw him again. My stomach dropped and my pulse shot up. He was standing there, exactly in the middle of the next stretch of road, a little farther ahead this time. The way he raised his arm, the slow, deliberate motion, made my skin crawl. I slammed my foot on the accelerator without thinking, the tires screaming as the car surged forward. My headlights cut across the asphalt, and the man seemed to freeze in place for a second before the light passed him. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. He wasn't moving in a normal way. Not at first. It was almost like he was waiting, like he knew I would see him. I kept driving, and every time I slowed for a curve or a turn, I thought I saw him in the distance, just at the edge of my headlights. My stomach felt like it was twisting into knots. The desert around me seemed endless, but there he was, appearing in places he shouldn't have been. I kept my speed up, tires cutting gravel from the shoulder, my eyes darting from side to side, searching for anything that would explain what I was seeing. A hitchhiker, a guy camping in the desert, a mirage. I tried to reason it all away, but the feeling in my gut told me otherwise. This wasn't imagination, and it wasn't a hallucination. There was something about him, standing there in that empty, unforgiving landscape that was impossible to ignore. The next hour passed in a blur. Every shadow on the road made me flinch. Every movement in the periphery of my vision made me swerve slightly, heart racing. I considered stopping, but there was no place to pull over safely, and the idea of leaving the car and walking into the desert was even more terrifying. The thought of being alone, in that endless black, with him somewhere out there, was unbearable. So I kept driving faster than I should have, my hands shaking on the wheel, my knuckles tight and sore. By the time I reached Austin, Nevada, I had calmed a little, though my pulse was still high. The road opened up into longer stretches with faint lights from distant houses. I tried to convince myself that he had just been some lost man walking along the road, that I would never see him again. But I couldn't shake the image of him standing in the dark, waving for something I wasn't sure I wanted to understand. I stopped at a small convenience store to get water and stretch my legs. The fluorescent lights inside were harsh, almost painful after so long in the dark. I took a long drink, trying to get my heartbeat to slow. The clerk was quiet, barely making eye contact, and I didn't feel like talking. I paid in silence and went back to my car, feeling the weight of the night pressing down on me like a physical thing. I got back on Route 50, the road stretching ahead, endless and empty. My headlights cut across the asphalt, illuminating small rocks and patches of sand drifting across the road. I drove in a tense, steady rhythm, eyes scanning every inch of the darkness. I tried to focus on the road, counting the miles to Fallon, reminding myself that the desert was vast and most people didn't walk its lonely stretches. I told myself it had to have been a lone person, maybe even someone trying to scare travelers for fun. But still, the memory of him lingered. I could see him in my mind, the way he had been so calm, so deliberate. In the middle of the road, his arm raised. It felt deliberate, calculated. Eventually, the first signs of dawn began to appear, pale light brushing the horizon. The darkness receded slowly, and with it, the oppressive weight of the night. By the time I finally reached Fallon, I was exhausted, body tense, hands sore from gripping the wheel. The town was quiet, early morning stillness settling over the streets. I pulled into a small motel parking lot and sat there for a long time, engine idling, trying to collect myself. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him again, but he was gone. Just the empty highway stretching back into the desert. I checked in, took a long shower, and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to make sense of what had happened. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The desert looked calm, almost peaceful, but I couldn't shake the memory of the man standing there in the darkness. I had been alone on that stretch of road for hours, thinking I was safe, thinking I was in control, and then suddenly, that sense of security vanished. I knew that night, driving across Route 50, I had seen something that didn't fit into normal explanation. Something that would stay with me every time I thought about driving through the desert at night again. It wasn't ghosts, and it wasn't a dream. It was real. I didn't see him again after that night, and I never stopped to try to figure out who he was. I don't want to know. But I remember every detail. The thin moon, the clouds drifting fast, the endless stretches of asphalt, the way he seemed to appear just where I could see him. And even now, years later, whenever I think about driving across Nevada at night, my hands tighten on the wheel, my eyes scan the darkness, and I remember the feeling of seeing someone in the middle of the road, alone in the desert, and knowing there was no one else around. That memory, more than anything else, is what gives me chills. I learned that night that isolation has its own dangers, and some parts of the world, no matter how empty they seem, can feel alive in the most unsettling ways. Even now, I can picture the road straight and dark, stretching toward the horizon, and I can see him standing there, waiting, watching, just beyond the reach of the headlights, a silent reminder that even the loneliest roads can hold something you never expect. I still remember the night like it was yesterday, even though it was a decade and a half ago. It happened in central Washington, on one of those empty roads most people don't even think about. The kind that stretches for miles without lights, without signs of life, without another car in sight. The road that curves around the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. Even saying the words now makes me feel that same pit in my stomach. Not because Hanford is haunted, but because it just feels wrong at night. It always has. A huge, sealed-off place that once made nuclear weapons. Fences for miles warning signs about radiation. Security checkpoints in the distance that you're not supposed to go near. During the day, it just looks like dry land. Yellow grass, big skies, and endless nothing. But at 10 at night, it feels like you're driving along the edge of the world. Somewhere humans were never meant to build anything, let alone something that could poison the earth. I was behind the wheel of my old SUV. It was late, but not too late. The air smelled like dust and cold metal, not like normal desert dust. It had that sharp smell, the same smell you get when rain hits hot iron, even though it hadn't rained for weeks. The tires hummed steadily, that low drone sound rubber makes on old pavement. The stereo was off. The windows were shut, but I could still feel the pressure of the outside night, like it was squeezing against the car. I wasn't alone, 3 of my friends were with me. All crammed inside, half tired, half alert, staring out at the darkness without talking much. Long drives do that to you. You start listening to things you normally ignore. The engine, your breathing, the way the wind pushes the car a little when you pass open land. The rattle in the back door that my SUV always had and I kept promising I'd fix but never did. That night, every little noise felt 10 times louder. We hit a long, steep hill. The kind that forces the car to work harder. The engine shifted lower, dragging its way up. The headlights shone up the incline like 2 pale knives cutting through shadow. The hill didn't have street lights. It didn't need them. No one traveled there enough for that kind of care. My foot pressed a little harder on the gas. The transmission groaned in response, steady but thick. That's when I saw it. A slow, dark shape ahead in my lane, moving uphill at a snail's pace. At first, my brain didn't even try to label it. It just registered it as something too slow, too small, too strange to belong there. The shape was no bigger than a large doghouse, maybe a little taller. Boxy, covered, with wheels that looked carved out of another century. I eased off the gas. The car slowed, but the engine kept pulling hard because of the slope. The headlights crawled up the back of the thing. Wood, canvas, small metal bolts along the frame, and then movement dogs. Too many dogs. I leaned forward without realizing. My hands tightened on the wheel. My heart was doing this heavy drum thing in my chest. Not fast, just big, like someone pounding from inside. The headlights finally showed them clearly. Border collies, black and white coats, thick with outdoor grime. Not fat, not sick. Strong dogs, working dogs, at least a dozen of them. Could have been more, maybe 15, maybe 18. It was hard to count them because they moved like a single mass. Their paws kicked up dust even on pavement. Their breathing puffed out like little clouds because the air was cold. Leashes or rope harnesses connected them all to a tiny covered wagon. The driver sat on a small wooden bench at the front. A man, thin shoulders, a long tangled beard, gray and black, hanging almost to his chest. He wore a heavy coat that looked patched together from pieces of different coats. It was torn in places and stitched in others with thick thread. His face was rough like dried clay, deep lines, windburn, red around the nose. His hands held the reins or ropes loosely, more like a man holding on out of habit than control. The dogs were pulling the wagon uphill like it was nothing. Their heads were low, necks strong, steps in perfect sync like they had trained for it their whole lives. Their hackles weren't raised, they weren't barking. That made it worse. Silence from a dozen working dogs at night felt unnatural. A pack that big should make noise, panting, whining something. But there was nothing except the tapping of their paws and the low creak of the wagon's wheels. I changed lanes a little but stayed behind them, not because I wanted to tail them, but because my brain was stuck in that slow motion place where it refuses to believe what it sees. My friends were now fully awake. One of them leaned toward the windshield. The other had half turned in his seat. The third was frozen with both hands, gripping the side of his door like he was holding himself up. The road there is cracked and old. Hanford routes don't get smooth pavement. The slope made every part of that scene feel heavier. The air was dry, but the dust rising around those dogs made it look smoky, almost like fog, even though there was no fog. Their eyes didn't glow like in movies. but they reflected the headlights like tiny marbles when their heads turned slightly, not toward us. Just small glances to keep balance. The wagon itself was a small, covered thing, the canvas pulling back into a peak shape at the top like old pioneer wagons. Tiny window slats cut into the side, covered from inside. No light leaked out. The wood looked hand-cut, not machine-cut, real wood, sanded smooth from time. The wheels had metal rims that tapped faintly whenever the cracks hit them. Tap, tap, not loud, but sharp. I felt a chill ripple down my back, the kind that begins at your shoulders and spreads slowly like cold ink. My mouth was dry, not thirsty dry, fear dry, the kind that makes swallowing feel like paper sliding against itself. We crept uphill behind them for maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute. Time didn't flow right there. It stretched. My brain kept asking the same useless questions. Why are there dogs pulling a wagon here? Who lives like that? How did no one see this on the news? Did this guy hike them out here from somewhere? Is something hidden inside that wagon? Not ghosts, not monsters, just human possibilities that were scarier. People living off-grid is one thing. This was something else. This felt like a system built for survival, secrecy, or stubbornness. My speed dropped to maybe 20 miles an hour. The engine felt loud next to their silence. My headlights shook a little as the SUV climbed. The dogs didn't slow. Their muscles worked under their coats in perfect unison. Their harness ropes were thick, hand-braided, dust-stained, like they had been used for years without being replaced. The wagon's frame had small little details nailed into it. A loop here, a metal latch there, a coiled extra rope hanging off the back, a lantern hook at the front, but the lantern was missing. I pulled farther left, guessing I might have to pass soon. The road didn't have much width. I felt anxious, not brave. Anxious. The driver didn't look back once. Not even a twitch of curiosity. That creeped me out more than anything supernatural ever could. A man driving a covered wagon pulled by a football team of border collies in total silence at night, going uphill around a nuclear dump site and not caring about the car behind him. That said, either he had seen everything or he expected nothing. I passed them slowly, giving them space. My headlights swung over them like a spotlight. The dog's paws tapped peacefully. The wagon creaked quietly, and the driver just sat there, head slightly bowed like a man listening to something distant that we couldn't hear. I exhaled only once we cleared past them. My friends didn't speak, but I felt the air in the car shift, like 3 held breaths finally released. We reached the top of the hill in silence. The road leveled out again. My speed climbed to 30, 40, 50. I glanced into the rearview mirror, fully expecting the road behind me to be empty again, or the wagon to be shrinking into the dark. But they were gone. No dogs, no wagon, no driver, no dust trail, no slow-moving bump sound, nothing. Just empty dark road glowing under our headlights as we drove forward. My stomach twisted, but not in that supernatural movie way. In that real-world way where your brain realizes something was there one moment and physically impossible to disappear the next. No side roads up the hill, no turn-offs, no ranch entrance, no headlights from other cars, no dog yips echoing, no brakes, no rattling, no human footsteps when we passed. It was like driving past a completely silent parade float that evaporated when you blinked. I slowed the car a little again out of instinct, like maybe physics would reset itself and they'd reappear. But the universe didn't fix that moment. The road stayed empty. I felt uneasy the rest of the drive, because if a guy like that existed, someone who moved silently through nuclear backroads at night, using only dogs and a homemade covered wagon, then there were types of lives, motives, and worlds hidden inside this country that none of us would ever see, explain, or understand. And that was scarier than anything fictional ever could be. Years later, I figured out what I had seen. Entire communities around central Washington train working dogs on massive team loads. Border collies are built for long-distance herding, pulling, and coordinated movement. The man wasn't a ghost. He was real. He was likely someone living deep off, grid near old farmland or herder land adjacent to reservation routes. The roads at Hanford curve for miles, but visibility tricks your brain because incline hides distance. From the top of the hill, the curve likely masked his turn or descent path. The silence wasn't eerie because it was paranormal. It was eerie because those dogs were trained professionals, doing what they had done 1,000 times. I still don't know who the man was, where he came from, or what he carried inside that tiny covered wagon. But I know it was real. It terrified me for reasons that made sense only later, and the fact that 4 witnesses saw it and still questioned their own brains tells you everything you need to know about the power of an empty highway at night. Some moments don't need ghosts to haunt you. They only need the unknown and the dark. It was still half dark when we got into the car. The clock on the dash told me 5 a.m., and that felt right. The sun was not up yet, but you could see a faint orange touch behind the mountain tops. It was one of those early mornings where the sky looks clean, the air looks sharp, and everything feels quiet, like the world has not fully powered on yet. The highway cut through a long mountain valley with tall rock walls on one side and thick pine forests on the other. The road bent left and right again and again, like someone tried to draw a snake using asphalt. We were driving in an old silver sedan. The heater hummed softly because the morning cold was still hanging in the shadows. My hands were warm from the steering wheel, but the outside world looked cold enough to snap. The mountains here had personality. Big hills, sharp corners, slow curves, sudden blind spots. There were reflective road signs on the edges, small metal arrows telling you where the road was going next. Some signs were slightly bent from old storms, rocks, or maybe from someone losing control too close to them. The highway itself was smooth in parts, but cracked in others. Thin lines of old repairs ran along the edges like scars. Every curve felt like an entrance into another smaller world, another pocket of silence, another blind stage where anything could happen. The radio was off. The only sound was the car engine, the tires pressing against the road, and little random noises like air hitting the side mirrors, or the occasional rock tapping under the car frame. I remember feeling so calm that it almost felt wrong. No trucks, no morning traffic, no hikers crossing the shoulder, no lights from gas stations. Not even a single bicyclist. I had driven highways at night many times, but this was different. Night feels scary because it is dark. This felt scary because it was empty. You expect emptiness in deserts, in open plains, or in abandoned towns. You do not expect it on a fully built highway, the kind that has painted lane markers, metal guard rails, emergency turn bays, signs for exits that stretch only further into the wild. The kind of emptiness that feels like a warning without words. I blinked once and looked into the rear view mirror. It was a quick glance, the kind you do out of habit. What I saw did not fit into my brain at first. Far behind us was a pair of headlights. Small, low-weight beams. Normal so far. But the way they were moving was wrong. They were not creeping toward us like a regular early morning car. They were lunging toward us like something out of control. It was too far to tell exactly how fast, but fast enough that it made my arms stiff. It looked like the car was eating the distance between us in giant bites. I told my friend to pay attention because the car behind us was flying toward our lane without switching to pass. The speed difference was monstrous. We were doing 90 km/h, a normal fast speed for those curves. But this car looked like it was launching missiles at the bends instead of tires. The road ahead curved again. A sharp left, followed by a short straight dash, then a winding right. The headlights behind us grew bigger by the second. I checked the speedometer and pushed a little more, 95, then 98. The car still closed in like gravity was pulling it. The guardrails on the right side were thick metal beams, cold and silver, leading toward a very deep ditch. That ditch was not just a drop. It was a canyon-like pit, at least 12 to 15 feet deep. From where we were sitting, it looked like a mouth ready to swallow anyone who drifted too close. Trees clung to the far edge of it. Tall pines, old trunks, branches stretching toward each other, like hands trying to reconnect over a gap. A thin layer of morning mist sat at the bottom, making it hard to see exactly how brutal the landing would be for a car that kissed the edge. The car was now close enough that I could see its shape. It was dark colored, maybe black or very deep blue. There were no other cars to make comparisons, no shadows except mountain shadows, so it was hard to tell exactly. The lane markers were bright enough to see from the headlights, long broken white lines showing that it was a passing zone. The car behind did not care. It stayed locked onto our lane like it was tunneled into our trunk. My heart was doing a slow drumbeat in my ears. Not fast, but heavy. My brain was doing math I did not ask for. If it does not switch lane, it hits us. If it loses control, it flips. If we switch lane, we might hit the rail ourselves. The car was maybe 80 meters away, 70, 60, then 40. This was not a chase. This was physics abuse. My friend swerved slightly toward the right to give the car behind extra space, almost hugging the line that warned a gravel and ditch. But instead of passing us cleanly, the driver behind made a survival decision we did not expect. At the very last second, the car jerked hard toward the ditch. It was not a smooth drift. It was a violent decision, like someone grabbed the steering wheel and yanked it away from a crash. The tires screamed. A brutal, metal-grinding shriek that sliced through the silent valley. The car went down the ditch nose first. I expected a flip, a crash, a fire maybe, a body flying maybe, something that would make sense. What happened instead made us feel like we were glitching out of reality. The ditch was deep enough that the first part of the car went totally out of view, just headlights sliding into the misty grave. But the momentum did not die. It used the ditch like a ramp. Instead of burying the car, it launched it. The front bumper hit the opposite side of the ditch, and the car shot up into the air, 4 to 5 feet above the highway surface, still doing around 100 km/h. The undercarriage was exposed for a moment. Metal frames, suspension arms shaking, pieces of mud, little rocks, clumps of grass falling like confetti from a disaster piñata. The car landed on all 4 tires hard, but stable. The tires kissed the highway again like claws finding ground. There was smoke from the tire friction. Light gray smoke trails following the impact and then thinning out quickly, leaving lazy snake lines behind. The suspension bounced once, twice, like an animal shaking off water. There was no stop, no hesitation, no breakdown. The driver reacted with pure instinct. Within 1 second of landing, the car accelerated forward, 110 km/h, 120, 30, 140. The gap between us went from dangerous close to unreachable in seconds. We were watching a man or woman who had almost died, but chosen to sprint away from the moment instead. It did not look heroic. It looked like someone escaping shame, fear, shock, or maybe their own heartbeat. The valley absorbed the noise again. Silence reclaiming its territory. The echoes of the tire shriek died against rock walls miles away. My brain felt like it was swimming slow. My arms were cold again even though the heater was running. The air smelled like rubber smoke and mountain pine. That smell sat in the car for minutes, a weird cocktail of danger residue. I kept driving. My eyes felt wide without blinking. The road ahead was still twisting, still bending like a puzzle built to test your luck. But it no longer looked the same. The emptiness felt heavier now, like the valley said, "See, it can happen." My foot stayed steady on the gas but did not push harder. There was no need. We did not want to catch the driver. We did not want to know more. We did not want to see their face. The human brain is curious, but survival curiosity is different. Sometimes your brain tells your heart to shut curiosity down and drive home alive. At around 6:15 a.m., we passed an emergency gravel bay, a small pull-out zone for broken-down cars. But there was no broken-down car in it. No person standing there confused. No bumper lying like evidence. We passed more guardrails, more pines, more reflective curve signs. Every single one looked clean and untouched. No sign that a car had launched out of a ditch like a failed suicide attempt turned stunt. It made the moment feel even stranger. If a tree falls in a forest and nobody is there, does it make a sound? We were there, it made a sound, but the world looked like it chose not to mark it. By 6:40 a.m., the sky was properly blue. Birds were waking up above the tree line. You could see the tops of the mountains clearly now, tall, calm, still dangerous, looking but honest about it. The sun was warming the valley. The air no longer looked sharp. It looked normal again, like a place where nothing weird ever takes place. The rubber smoke smell was gone. The road was no longer a threat stage, just a normal highway in daylight trying to look innocent again. When we reached the first little town at 7:05 a.m., reality felt fully loaded again. Small shops opening, one gas station clerk standing outside stretching, a delivery van parked near a bakery, people out walking their dogs. I pulled over into a parking lot next to a closed coffee shack that was just opening. My hand still felt a tiny shake when I let go of the wheel. Not panic shake. The aftershock kind. The body remembers even when the road doesn't. We never reported it to anyone. There was no phone signal in that mountain pocket anyway, and even if there was, we were too stunned to want to relive it. The person vanished miles ahead, probably reached their own destination, maybe told nobody either. Maybe it was just a sleepy driver who woke up 1 second before turning 2 lives into headlines. Maybe it was a reminder that highways don't need ghosts to be scary. Sometimes silence and bad timing are enough. Eventually, we drove out of the lot, continued the rest of the way home. The world now loud, human, normal still. When I got to my driveway, the moment didn't feel unreal anymore. It felt like one of those rare life scenes that burns itself into your memory without needing drama, without needing magic, without needing explanation. It was just speed, shock, bad luck, good reflex, and a valley that kept the secret like a professional. I sat in the car for a bit after parking. The stillness of my own driveway silence no longer scared me. It calmed me, because now I knew the difference between safe silence and warning silence. And this one was finally safe. I was 16, maybe 17, old enough to think I knew everything, young enough to prove I didn't. We had borrowed my mom's 1998 Chevy Lumina, the kind of car every high school family seemed to own back then. 3 rows of seats even though it wasn't a van. Cloth interior that permanently smelled like someone spilled soda 5 years ago. The dashboard was cracked from summers that cooked the plastic like it was curing it for all time. The air vents only blew either ice, cold or lukewarm. The radio antenna was bent, so every station came in half fuzzy, like you were always listening from underwater. The car was not fancy. It did not feel safe. But it was freedom on 4 tires, and we treated it like a spaceship. My friend Nate was in the passenger seat. My other friend Cole was slouched in the back left seat, leaning his shoulder against the window. I remember the texture of that glass under my palm when I braced myself for the turns. Cold, smooth. Slightly sticky in places from years of fingers and humidity. We were out in a part of Illinois that didn't feel like a real place at night. Rural in the daytime is charming. Rural at night feels like the world ends at your headlights. Cornfields filled everything. You couldn't tell where the land dipped or rose, because corn grows tall and flat and hides the truth. The stalks were dry by the end of summer, leaves papery and brittle, whispering against each other when the wind pushed through. The road cut a perfect dark hallway between walls of green-black plants. Every few miles, a farmhouse stood back off the road, one porch light glowing like a lighthouse that didn't want visitors. Some houses were dark. Others had faint yard lamps that made the windows look like yellow rectangles floating in void. Grain silos showed up here and there, huge and quiet, metallic or concrete, looming like unfinished monuments. It was around 1:30 a.m., deep in the kind of late that feels like a secret. The sky was clear, stars sharp enough to look fake. Humidity hung low, so the air felt thick, but the breeze when we cracked the windows was cool. It smelled like dirt, growing plants, and a hint of manure from distant livestock. Cigarette smoke and weed clouded the car interior, swirling in the low, glow orange of the instrument lights. I remember how the digital clock glowed an eerie green, the colon blinking between hours and minutes like a heartbeat. We had a half-empty bottle of warm, cheap whiskey rolling on the backseat floor. Beer cans rested in the footwells. A lighter rattled in the cup holder. The steering wheel felt damp under my hands from sweat and condensation. Every mile marker that flashed by was like a notch carved into memory. The road signs were reflective green, but the paint on the actual road lines was faded. I mostly steered by feel and the vague memory of curves coming from the drive out. There was no traffic, no distant taillights, no engine noise drifting up from towns. The only sound was our car tires humming on pavement that felt endless, mixed with the occasional thump from the whiskey bottle shifting when I adjusted speed. The engine had a low idle growl because Luminas always sounded slightly tired when they ran. Bugs hit the windshield at intervals, tiny ticking impacts spreading milky smears that the wipers only made worse. I remember hitting the washer fluid, the chemical smell blasting briefly through the vents, overly sweet and sharp. Then the lights came. At first it was a pulse, faint but too intense to be distant headlights. The rear view mirror should have only shown deep black. Instead, 2 huge white, Blue suns bloomed behind us, expanding fast. Not flickering like emergency lights. Not bouncing like high beams behind a hill. These lights moved with purpose. They swallowed distance in a way cars shouldn't. It felt like an animal pouncing. The mirror reflected so much brilliance that the inside of our car instantly turned silver, daytime bright. Shadows vanished. Everything was washed clean by sheer light. It was like someone poured lightning into the car and froze it in place. The glow was overpowering, so dense it felt solid. Every particle of smoke in the air lit up like dust in a projector beam. The seats bleached white. The ceiling fabric glowed, fibers visible like threads under a microscope. Even the leather keychains hanging from the ignition shimmered. I could see Nate's pupils pin, thin, tiny black dots fighting the glare. Cole's jaw hung open, sharp lines of his teeth glowing like he was cut out of paper. My own reflection in the mirror wasn't a face anymore, just an outline of shock-hugging bone. The light didn't arrive slowly. It didn't stalk up like a car gaining speed. It ambushed us. In 1 second there was nothing. In the next, blinding radiance. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard it felt painful. The air in my lungs stopped moving. My whole body felt like it braced for impact. The fear wasn't soft or creeping. It was primal, sudden, stupid human-animal fear that feels like instinct takes over your organs. My foot twitched off the gas, but the car didn't jerk because I had already been slowing in shock. The brightness made me feel naked, exposed, like we were insects on a glass slide and someone finally turned the lens toward us. I kept expecting noise, sirens, engines, yelling, tires screeching. But there was none. The silence was worse because it made no sense. My brain kept trying to label the moment. Cop car, high beams, search helicopter, some kind of truck. None of those ideas survived a full thought. The light had texture, weight. It felt intentional, almost curious. The color temperature wasn't warm like halogen or amber like sodium road lamps. It was a cold, piercing white that edged into blue. Too pure, too clinical, too much like daylight but filtered through something alien in tone and purpose. It was like laboratory light, stadium light, arc weld light. All of those were wrong, but they were closer than cop lights. Then it vanished, not gradually, not fading to saved memory. It is snapped off like a breaker got thrown in the universe. The car interior dropped back into darkness instantly. The outside world closed again. No glow lingered. No headlights receded. No echo of brightness stuck to the cornfields. The windshield went back to black. The mirror showed black. The stars stayed unbothered overhead. It felt like someone inhaled light out of the world and left us choking on the vacuum. My eyes burned from the sudden dark, disoriented. Spots seared into my retinas like spectral stains. My hearing rang from adrenaline, a high internal whine, even though nothing external had made sound. My pulse hammered in my throat. Already ruined by the illness I was pretending I didn't have. I had been coughing earlier in the night, that dry, scratchy kind of cough that comes from smoke and sickness. Now the inside of my neck felt like sandpaper. Every breath stung, thin little blades rubbing soft tissue. The taste of beer and smoke metallic on my tongue. My hands floated millimeters above the wheel for a second before gripping again. The wheel felt real, grounding, damp but familiar. Nate exhaled once, shaky, fogging the window before retreating back into motionless shock. Cole didn't even shift. The cornfields outside kept rustling faintly, leaves scraping against stalks like blind, whispering grasshoppers. The road ahead twisted away into a curve I suddenly didn't trust. I slowed until we were maybe doing 40 in a 55. The speed felt reckless now. Cole scrubbed his palms on his jeans like he finally noticed they were sweating. The ashtray I had emptied before the trip already held fresh cigarette scars on its plastic lip. The digital clock blinked 1:38 a.m. I remember because I kept glancing at it like time might explain the impossible if I looked enough times. Nothing chased us afterward. No car erupted back into existence to claim the moment. No cop ever pulled us over that night. No trucks appeared. No helicopters hovered. Phones back then barely had signal out there anyway, but mine showed 0 bars when I checked later. The absence of explanation felt thick. The emptiness felt hostile. I kept driving, jaw aching, shoulder muscles clenched in a way that felt bruising by the end of it. The road hummed under tires again, but it now sounded like a warning instead of a companion. When we reached town around 20:10 a.m., the roadway finally passed streetlights and gas stations. The glow felt cheap and dirty and blessedly human. Nate lit one last cigarette, the flame tiny and comforting compared to what we had just lived through. Cole finally sat upright and rubbed his face, like he was rebooting his sense of self. We parked behind the closed grocery store and killed the engine. The silence after turning off the car felt normal again. Empty but not violent, just quiet. We sat there longer than we needed to. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe 30. The air outside smelled like asphalt cooling under night sky. My throat still hurt like hell. My head buzzed lightly from lingering smoke and alcohol and adrenaline. But the fear had shaped now we survived it. We lived through something huge, something we couldn't name, and nothing had killed us or arrested us or ruined us. The next day at school we were tired but intact. Years passed. We made jokes about it. People made jokes about it. The story shrank into legend. But the moment itself never shrank. Even now I can still feel that light inside a stupid old Chevy Lumina spilling over teenage mistakes in the middle of nowhere. I don't think about ghosts or monsters because those are easy stories. This one never found an easy home. 25 years later, I finally accepted the explanation I had ignored back then. What we saw was almost certainly a military aircraft doing low alt maneuvers from a base not too far south, testing new lighting arrays, the kind that move faster than road traffic ever could, the kind that don't announce themselves, the kind that can swallow the world in one breath and disappear just as fast. Cole and Nate and I didn't encounter something unreal. We encountered a corner of the real world that was bigger than 3 scared high school kids had room for. We walked away from it with our nerves fried, our senses confused, and our lives unchanged except for one permanent scar of memory that never faded. No supernatural thing needed to happen for us to almost stop breathing that night. Sometimes reality alone delivers the shock. Sometimes the dark hides things that don't belong in teenage stories. Sometimes you get a glimpse, too bright to blink, and it stays with you forever because you lived long enough to remember it. And that, in the end, is the real fear. Not that the unknown visited, but that it left without giving a name, and we had to spend the rest of our lives growing old enough to finally understand it.